over the dark night. She reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star.
Greetings, and as always, welcome back. States announce unprecedented measures to halt the Gaza genocide at Bogota conference. This was reported out today. In the most ambitious multilateral action since the start of the Gaza genocide 21 months ago, a coalition of cross-regional states gathered in Bogota, and they've agreed to 6 coordinated diplomatic, legal, and economic measures to restrain Israel's assault on the occupied Palestinian territories and defend international law at large. What are these measures and why now? Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. With each show, my guests and I provide insight and analysis into current events and the broader historic context in which most of these events take place. Let's quickly look at a couple of today's headlines. The Financial Times is reporting Israel strikes Syrian military headquarters in Damascus. Attack follows days of deadly sectarian clashes in southern Syria and marks significant escalation of the Israeli campaign. Israel carried out the strikes near Syria's presidential palace and on the military headquarters in Damascus earlier today, a significant escalation of its bombing campaign in the neighboring country. Israel casts its strike as an effort to protect Syria's Druze minority and has demanded the Syrian government withdraw its forces from Swaida, where the sectarian violence has been concentrated. The Wall Street Journal reports New York Mayor Eric Adams led criminal enterprise at the New York Police Department, former top cop alleges. Thomas Donlan, who served as interim commissioner for 3 months in 2024, has filed a federal lawsuit asking a judge to appoint a special monitor to oversee the nation's largest police force. Former New York City Police Commissioner has filed this lawsuit alleging Mayor Eric Adams and other top officials ran the police department as a criminal enterprise, engaging in racketeering, wire fraud, and obstruction of justice. With stories like this one has to ask oneself, why this story? Why now? The Wall Street Journal continues, the new corruption allegations will renew security of Adams' administration and his management of the police department as he seeks a second term in office in November. This time, as he's running as an independent. Folks, this tells me, as we were talking about before, Zohran Mamdani could have a bit more juice in the squeeze than he's previously being given credit for. And it also looks as though Trump is backing former Mayor Mario Cuomo. Somebody should tell old Eric Adams, you can't bark like a dog and pee like a puppy. The streets don't work that way. Final piece. Consortium News Israel bans Gazans from entering the sea under pain of death. Israel has warned Gazans to stay out of the Mediterranean Sea or risk getting killed under wartime restrictions that critics say serve no security purpose and are meant to deprive Palestinians of a key source of sustenance and respite from the horrific realities of this 21 months of constant death and destruction. They don't even want Palestinian fishermen to go into the sea, and they don't even want Palestinian swimmers in the Mediterranean. You know, folks, Trump said last week he's not happy with President Putin saying Moscow's ongoing war in Ukraine is, quote, killing a lot of people on both sides, and I'm not happy with him. I can tell you that much right now. This is killing a lot of people, Trump said of Putin, but he obviously thinks killing Palestinians is just business as usual. On today's episode, the issue before us is a jointly convened conference by the governments of Colombia and South Africa as co-chairs. The emergency conference of the Hague Group brought together 30 states from Africa, Asia, and Europe, as well as North America and South America, to move beyond words of condemnation. What does all this mean? My guest is a human rights, labor rights lawyer and political activist. He formerly taught international human rights at the University of Pittsburgh School of Law, Professor Dan Kovalik, and he's also the author of a number of books, the latest of which is The Case for Palestine, Why It Matters and Why It Cares. Professor Dan Kovalik, welcome back to the show.
Thanks a lot for having me.
Well, so the Gaza genocide at the Bogota conference, to kickstart that process, 12 states from across the world, Bolivia, Colombia, Cuba, Indonesia, Iraq, Libya, Malaysia, Namibia, Nicaragua, Oman, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and South Africa, they have committed to implementing 6 measures immediately through their domestic, legal, and administrative systems to break the ties of complicity with Israel's campaign of devastation in Palestine. Professor Dan Kovalik, you have been a part of a number of similar types of conferences, similar types of action. What does this specific Bogota conference say to you?
Well, I'll be totally honest. I was hopeful that it would produce more than it did, to be honest. I think given the states involved, what they've agreed to is not going to make a huge difference. Because why I say that is they're not countries that are very strategically positioned to help in what they want to do. And it's mostly to restrict trade with Israel, especially lethal trade. But also they do talk about trying to ensure that international law norms will be enforced against Israel. Again, I'm not sure what they can really do to do that. Sam Husseini, who's a Palestinian American, I actually talked with him in advance of the conference. I was invited to go to Bogota. I decided not to in the end. But Sam has been pushing for some time the idea of the General Assembly of the United Nations passing what's called a Uniting for Peace resolution, in which they could essentially do an end around the Security Council in order that drastic measures take place to protect the people of Palestine, including sending a peacekeeping force to protect the people of Gaza. And I think that is absolutely necessary and demanded here. But the Hague Group did not pass a measure to do that, or to try to even initiate that at the United Nations. That is something they could do, right? They could initiate such a resolution, try to get other countries on board, and maybe get it passed. No one is trying to do that, which I find completely baffling. So again, what they've agreed to is good. I would say, important, but I'm concerned that at this, you asked at the beginning of the episode, kind of why now? And I would say that these measures are probably measures that should have been put in place a long time ago. I would say that now much more drastic measures are necessary to protect people in Palestine, hundreds of thousands of which have already died, by the way, so I'm a little disappointed. I'll be totally honest. I was ready to come on here and sing the praises of the Hague Group, and it's a little hard for me to do.
So do we put this in the category of more symbolic than practical application? But with that being said, is there still some value in the symbolism?
Well, there's always value in symbolism. It's important what anyone does to try to stop this genocide or any type of abuses in the world. But I think, again, given where we're at, we're quickly approaching 2 years of this genocide. Hundreds of thousands of people dead, people starving right now, dying of thirst, dying of starvation-related diseases, being corralled into concentration camps, being shot when they try to get aid. I think it's time for more than symbolic acts. And the other thing they didn't agree to, which again I also find baffling, they didn't affirmatively say, hey, we're going to bring aid in to Gaza. Well, these states actually could, if all 12 agreed, they could send a multi-state flotilla to Gaza with aid. And I don't think Israel would try to stop them. If they did, that could lead to an international incident that could provoke a military response, which, again, may be necessary at this point. But they didn't do that either. Again, which I find very strange. Why aren't they doing that? Why isn't China doing that? Why isn't Russia doing that? Why aren't they bringing in aircraft carriers full of humanitarian aid? Do you think Israel's going to fire on them? I doubt that. So I don't know. I'm troubled. I'll just say I'm troubled that people are dying as we're speaking, and we need more than symbolism.
I find it somewhat puzzling. That's the word. And in fact, Kevin Baptiste says the BRICS nations should have taken this on.
Yes.
And BRICS just had their conference in Brazil. So here you have a BRICS conference in Brazil that was just held last week. And now you have this conference in Bogota. So from a regional perspective, they were relatively in close proximity. This could have been coordinated, and it would have been a hell of a statement if BRICS had held their conference in concert with the Bogota conference or vice versa. And they came out not only with a joint statement, but to Kevin's point, a joint plan of action.
Well, it's true. But, I think that underscores the shortcomings of BRICS. First of all, India is the I in BRICS. India supports the genocide. In fact, they said it's a model for them. They want to do the same thing to Kashmir that Israel's doing to Gaza. Okay, so that's a big impediment to BRICS doing something like this, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
When you look at the member states in BRICS, they don't have a unified position on a lot of these types of things, right? So they're not going to do that. Even Brazil, honestly, has been pretty tepid in its criticisms of Israel. Lula da Silva, the president, in this iteration of his presidency, has been pretty conservative. He actually vetoed Venezuela's membership in the BRICS, for example. So that doesn't surprise me at all. It's disappointing, but it doesn't surprise me that BRICS hasn't done something more. I did think maybe Russia and or China would do something more. Again, that they might do more to get aid there, that they might lead some actions at the UN to intervene here. But again, they have not. And again, there's some reasons for that. You know, Russia has about 1.5 million citizens who live in Israel, dual citizens, which I think, and they've always bent over backwards, certainly since the collapse of the Soviet Union, to have good relations with Israel, in part due to that, but also because of business relations. China is one of the biggest trading partners with Israel, if not the biggest one at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that? Why haven't they cut off trade to Israel? I mean, when you really look at what's happening in the world, you're seeing a great abandonment of the Palestinian people. At best, you see words. You see few deeds. Yemen is an exception. Yemen is really...
Oh, they're about that life.
Yeah, I mean, they're amazing, and they've suffered a lot due to, you know, they've sacrificed a lot
mm-hmm.
to help the Palestinians. Iran has too. Iran has to be given credit. Yeah. Hezbollah has to be given credit in Lebanon, but that pretty much ends the discussion, right? There's no other countries that are doing that much for Palestine. It's good South Africa brought that case against Israel at the ICJ. It's good Nicaragua brought a case against Germany at the ICJ. But those cases are moving at a glacier pace. They're not going to make a difference, is the truth of it. You know, we have to recognize it. I mean, the facts are the facts. And again, I'm troubled. I'm troubled by the lack of, well, on the part of the BRICS countries and others, their lack of affirmative action to help the Palestinians, and of course, the West is actively helping Israel kill the Palestinians. So the world has failed them to a greater extent, you know.
Robert Brown, thank you very much for that $10 super sticker. And your point, how much are other countries willing to sacrifice to help Palestinians? It's clear symbol without substance is meaningless. And Dan, let me take that statement to your just point about BRICS, because we understand BRICS to be primarily a trade and economic organization. And to your point about India being the eye in BRICS, and they are looking to use Israel as a model as they try to engage in genocide in Kashmir. That I understand the economic aspect and the economic focus, but I don't see how any organization that promotes itself as being a counter to imperialism and hegemony could sit idly by and quietly as it relates to genocide. And it doesn't matter to me who is involved in the genocide. The who doesn't matter because it's genocide. Dan Kovalik.
Yeah, well, the Genocide Convention in 1948 requires states to act to prevent and stop genocide. So you're right. I mean, all states have that obligation. But again, when you look at BRICS, again, they're limited in terms of their ideological perspective, which again is all over the map because all those countries are all over the map. And even, I would definitely say they're anti-hegemonic. Because they don't want the U.S. to be the sole hegemon in the world. But I wouldn't say they're affirmatively anti-imperialist, not in the way the Soviet Union was, for example, or Cuba under Fidel Castro. Those are two big standouts. I wouldn't say any of the states in BRICS really fit that bill, and therefore, the group as a whole wouldn't either. China itself, I mean, I have a lot of respect for China, but it has never played a very good role in the anti-imperialist struggle. First of all, under Mao, for a long time, they actually supported the U.S. imperial positions in the world because Mao saw the Soviet Union as a greater threat, I think quite wrongly, but he did, than the United States. And therefore, they supported Pinochet in Chile. They were, at one point, actually went to war with Vietnam after its liberation struggle against the United States. So, and even more recently, you can't say that they're like this active force against imperialism, right? I mean, so we just have to be honest with where the world is at the moment. And we don't have the type of anti-imperialist leadership that we used to have, which I greatly regret. I cry myself to sleep every night, missing Fidel Castro. I don't see someone like him in the world today.
Let's just quickly take a look at some of the provisions from this joint statement in Bogota. Prevent the provision of or transfer of arms, munitions, military fuel, etc. Prevent the transit, docking, and servicing of vessels at any port. Prevent the carriage of arms, munitions, military fuel related to military equipment and dual-use items. Commence an urgent review of all public contracts. Comply with obligations to ensure accountability for the most serious crimes under international law, and support universal jurisdiction mandates. All those things are incredibly admirable statements, but how does one take those admirable statements and turn them into action?
Yeah, well, especially because I don't think any of those states are on the Mediterranean or the Red Sea, unless I'm mistaken. Many, I don't think, even have navies, the countries we're talking about. The contracts, okay, that's good. But again, I'm not sure any of these are big players when it comes to Israel to begin with. So again, what does all this mean in reality? I mean, I hate to be critical of countries that are trying to do anything, but why didn't they say we're going to go back to the United Nations and at least propose a uniting for peace resolution to intervene and send in UN troops to protect Palestinians? Why didn't they say we're going to organize international aid to be brought to Palestine? Instead, they passed a resolution to do things they're really not in a position to do. Right?
Right.
I mean, I could pass that resolution, and what good would that do? None.
Well, why don't you, Dan Kovalik?
Yeah, okay, I'm all for those things. I will do my best to halt trade to Israel, right? You see what I'm saying? Like,
I do.
there's something about it that, I'm sorry, the more I think about it, the more upset I get about it.
There's
The truth of it.
So to your point about why didn't these countries as a group go to the UN and request or initiate a keeping force
The Uniting for Peace.
Uniting for Peace initiative, would that have wound up getting vetoed by the Security Council, or is that an action that could have been passed through the General Assembly?
Right, that is something. That's the whole point of the Uniting for Peace resolution.
Gotcha. I wanted you to flesh and articulate that.
Is that it is a General Assembly resolution that would basically, do an end around the Security Council.
Mm-hmm.
Given that the Security Council, all their resolutions to help Palestine are vetoed by the United States. And so, but there is a mechanism in place it's called Uniting for Peace, where the General Assembly can then say, okay, fine, Security Council, if you're not going to do anything, we will. Because Security Council, you only have 15 members. We have 191 or whatever it is. And we're going to say, okay, we want peacekeepers sent to Palestine or whatever. As far as I know, not one state member has even proposed to do that.
Really?
Not that I know of. There are people that are, individual citizens who are advocating for this, but I haven't seen any state take it up. And even, I'll tell you, this is interesting because, again, this Sam Husseini, he's in D.C. Do you know Sam?
I know Sam quite well. I'm going to turn to Sam. Go ahead.
He's been very outspoken on this issue. And he even says that even Francesca Albanese has not called for that, right? So what is it? What's happening? What's going on here? It doesn't make any sense to me. So,
well, in fact, I'm glad you brought up her name because, quote, these 12 states have taken a momentous step forward, said UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the occupied Palestinian territory, Francesca Albanese. Quote, the clock is now ticking for states from Europe to the Arab world and beyond to join them, end quote. And that's, again, the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights, Francesca Albanese, who herself has now found herself under sanctions from the threat of sanctions from the Trump administration. Dan Kovalik.
Yeah, I think she's actually been sanctioned.
Right.
I think including, they talked about freezing her bank accounts, and I don't know all the details of that, but that was one thing that they said they're going to do.
As they did to the former head of the ICC, and I just drew a blank on her name. Al Bensouda.
Was her first name Fatima or Fatima?
Al Bensouda, yes.
Yeah. No, it's true. So, I mean, and obviously that's terrible and it's absurd. Meanwhile, this happened around the same time that the Trump administration declassified the successor to Al-Qaeda in Syria as a terrorist group, right? So they sanctioned her, and yet Al-Qaeda, they say, we're no longer going to treat as a terrorist group. So, I mean, it really shows what, really exposes the true position and nature of the United States. But yeah, I mean, Francesca Albanese, who I have a lot of respect for and who people want to win the Nobel Prize, and I think she should, even she's been a little tepid in terms of the things she's called for, to remedy what's happening in Gaza. So a lot of this is, I don't know. I'm just confused. I don't know why this is happening.
To your point, it seems as though certain individuals whose positions require them to go forward are only willing to push this issue to a certain point.
Right. Right. Again, outside Yemen and Hezbollah and Iran, that's exactly true. I mean, and most of the countries are doing nothing but issuing proclamations. They're saying words. The Gulf states, Egypt, Jordan, Turkey, which continues to sell oil to Israel. You'll hear Erdogan from Turkey say real, damning things about Israel, but then he keeps sending them oil that they need to prosecute the genocide. So,
or allowing stolen oil to transit through Turkey and stolen food as well, grain and other agricultural products that have been absconded or stolen from the breadbasket of the region, which is Syria.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the level, I would say, of hypocrisy here and cynicism is pretty incredible. That's all I'll say. And again, I don't want to go so far as to say the Hague Group is cynical, but I am very disappointed about what they can. And by the way, I think there were more, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought there were like 30 countries potentially in the Hague Group. But there's only 12 countries that even sign up for these 6.
I don't know the answer to that question.
So I mean, 12 countries in the world, that's not many countries, and most of the countries we're talking about are not big hitters, aside from Indonesia, which is the 4th largest country in the world. That's aside, but it's all the way in the Pacific Ocean. Again, I don't know what it's really going to do. I don't know. I don't know what any of this means, is to be totally truthful.
Well, let's shift gears from the Bogota conference to the road to Damascus and Liberation Theology with Dan Kovalik, which is a phenomenal interview. I strongly suggest folks take a look and a listen to the road to Damascus and Liberation Theology with Dan Kovalik. You recently took a trip to Syria in January, shortly before sectarian violence escalated against religious minorities and massacres of Alawites and Christians occurred. What's going on right now on the ground in Syria, Professor Dan Kovalik?
Yeah, I mean, it's unspeakable what's happening there. There have been mass murders of Alawites, which is an Islamic a sect. Thousands of Alawites have been killed. 2 Christian churches now have been bombed. One of them during mass, 22 people killed, 50 plus people injured. Christians are being also persecuted. Now the Druze, another religious minority in Syria, is being subjected to murder and rape. Women, particularly Alawite women and girls, are being kidnapped and brought into sexual slavery. All this by the new HTS government, which is nothing but a rebranded al-Nusra Front of Al-Qaeda. And so while you have a genocide taking place in Gaza, you have genocide taking place, multiple genocides taking place in Syria by a government that now is being recognized by most countries in the world. Most countries, if they had sanctions against the Assad government, have now lifted sanctions against this new government. they've promised all kinds of aid to go into Syria, which I'm not against. I mean, the people need it desperately. But the point is, they've given total legitimacy to this government, which has no legitimacy, which came to power through really a coup, which has never been elected. I doubt if it will ever stand for election. The new leader, Giuliani, who up till recently had a $10 million bounty on his head from the United States because he's a terrorist, has recently said they won't have elections for 4 to 5 years. Again, I'm not sure that they'll even do it then, but still, this government's been given all kinds of legitimacy by the world, but they're carrying out these genocidal policies in Syria.
Whenever anybody mentions al-Jilani's name, I go back to a incredibly scathing piece from the Wall Street Journal entitled "How a Syrian Rebel Went from an American Jail to Seizing Aleppo." And let me read a little bit of it. Once affiliated with Islamic State and Al-Qaeda, Jilani professes religious tolerance. Many have doubts. Abu Muhammad al-Jilani boarded a bus in Damascus in March of 2003, heading across the desert to Baghdad with fellow volunteers eager to repel the looming American invasion of Iraq. When he returned home in 2011, after a 5-year stint in an American-run prison camp in Iraq, it was as the emissary of Islamic State founder Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Jilani arrived in Syria with bags full of cash and a mission to take the extremist movement global. Last week, and this piece I think is from 2023, 42-year-old Jilani triumphantly entered Aleppo, Syria's second largest city, as the leading commander of the Turkish-backed rebel force dominated by his group, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Expected and swift, his victory marks one of the most dramatic moments in a Middle East that has no shortage on drama. That's from the Wall Street Journal, supporting your point. How does this guy go from having a $10 million CIA bounty on his head as a clearly designated terrorist to being backed by Turkey and the United States? Dan Kovalik.
Yeah, well, I always refer people to this article by Seymour Hersh, the Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, from 2007 that he wrote in the New Yorker magazine. And in it, it's called The Redirection. In it, he talks about how after about 2005, the Bush administration went from ostensibly fighting Al-Qaeda, right, which was, we were told, took down the World Trade Center, to supporting Al-Qaeda and other groups like it to go after countries like Libya, Syria, Iran. This is in 2007, right? And Obama continued that policy as well. And so none of this should be a surprise to people who are paying attention. There's also an interesting document that the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA, one of our numerous intelligence agencies, put out in 2012. Now, this is right near the beginning of the war in Syria against Assad. And in this document, which was classified at first but became declassified through a FOIA request, they say that the Western states are backing Al-Qaeda in Syria, and that the goal of Al-Qaeda is to set up a religious caliphate in Syria. And so what happened is that the West continued to back Al-Qaeda in Syria, it came to power and is now setting up a religious caliphate in Syria, which is completely intolerant to any other religious groups. So again, we were told this. We were told this in 2012, 13 years ago. What has come to pass, our own intelligence agencies knew was going to come to pass if they were successful in what they were doing. So while it shocks the conscience that we would do, that the U.S. would do such a thing, that's what it's been doing for many years. And again, you can go back even further than that. I mean, let's remember the U.S. supported the Mujahideen in Afghanistan beginning in June of 1979, one of whose leaders was Osama bin Laden, who would go on to form Al-Qaeda. Right? I mean, you couldn't make this stuff up, right?
Right.
You really couldn't. If I wrote a novel with this sort of plot, people would say I'm nuts. But this is how it's gone over and over and over again. And of course, there's the, I think it's undisputed that even after 9/11, Osama bin Laden had a lot of family members here. George Bush put them on a plane, even though all of the airspace was closed. He put them on a plane and got them out of the country. So we've been working with terrorist groups for years and years, we meaning the U.S. government, to advance U.S. or strategic interest, or at least the strategic interest of some of the U.S. ruling class. The U.S. backed terrorists in Chechnya against Russia as well. I mean, neo-Nazis in Ukraine. I mean, this is just the order of the day. I mean, again, it's shocking, but it's not surprising. If people have been paying attention, they'd see that this has been happening for a long time.
I take personal issue with the point you made about the bin Laden family being allowed to leave the country, because I wasn't allowed to attend my grandmother's funeral in California because she passed or her funeral was scheduled right around the same time, and all flights across the country were canceled. But the bin Laden family, the FBI boarded their plane at Logan Airport in Boston, I believe, checked their passports and allowed them to leave the country when I was not allowed to attend my grandmother's funeral. That's just a personal note.
Yeah, well, but that's true. It is an amazing fact that all of the airspace was grounded except for the bin Ladens and Air Force One, presumably. But yeah, it's just one of these incredible stories. And in Saudi Arabia's, participation in 9/11 has been really downplayed by the U.S. government. It never, not for 1 second, did it interfere with the relations the U.S. has with Saudi Arabia. And again, the U.S. partnered with Saudi Arabia and Qatar and the UAE in places like Syria to overthrow Assad.
Bandar Bush.
Huh?
Don't forget the nickname Bandar Bush.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, people, if all Americans understood this, that, we'd have a revolution. I mean, the idea that our government claims to have a war on terror, but it's conducting a war of terror. How can people put up with this? How can they put up with the fact that this Al-Qaeda group has been murdering Christians in Syria? Syria was the place where Christianity was founded, and the head of St. John the Baptist is actually in Syria, or was up till this time. I don't know where it is now. Anyway, it's a very important situs for Christianity. Christianity is being destroyed there as we speak, and yet not a peep in the news or by politicians. I don't know what to say about it.
Again, we were told that al-Assad had to be overthrown because he was a brutal, head-chopping terrorist, but al-Jilani, Mohammed al-Jilani, is supported by the United States. The $10 million bounty on his head is removed by the CIA. The United States backs him in the overthrow of al-Assad, and you were an election observer. I remember interviewing you in Syria during the election that you said of re-election of al-Assad that you said was free and fair. Dan Kovalik.
Yeah, I mean, certainly by that time, which was 2021, May of 2021, most Syrians realized that Assad had saved the country from these crazies, from these terrorists, and had saved and protected minority groups from them. And even
wait a minute. The very groups that the United States claimed that Assad had gassed and the white helmets had saved. Thank you, Whitney Webb, for documenting the reality of that lie. I just wanted to make that bring up that data point, Dan Kovalik.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, the lies were incredible. And I went to churches, in Syria, where people talked about how the Syrian Arab army, Assad's Arab army, protected them when the terrorists being backed by the U.S. went to try to destroy their churches, right? Hezbollah helped out as well, helped the Christians, which a lot of people would be surprised to hear. I mean, basically, everything that we're being told about the world, and specifically about the Middle East and Syria, is totally the opposite of reality. I can tell you in Pittsburgh, I know many Syrian Christians. And, they're very critical of Assad in many ways, but they also understood that he and his army were the only thing standing between them, again, and these terrorists that the West brought in. And they knew when Assad was overthrown what it would mean for the Christians there, and they were right. And now, people are just absolutely devastated by what they see happening back home in Syria. And by the way, a lot of these Syrians I know used to go back to Syria to visit. They won't go now. I mean, they're afraid to go back. So, but sadly, wisdom many times comes too late, Wilmer. Sadly, a lot of us were singing this tune for a long time, and we were called Assadists and all sorts of things. But we were right,
I remember interviewing you. You were on the border of Syria, and you were talking about the contradiction of the narrative as all these Syrians were allegedly returning as al-Jilani was taking power. But you said the thing that's not being discussed are all the Syrians that are fleeing the country in fear for their lives. Dan Kovalik.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, basically, if you looked at the numbers at that time, it was more or less a wash. Yes, there were people returning, but there were many people fleeing, especially at that time. The Shia population was fleeing in huge numbers from Syria for fear of being attacked by the new government, as were Christians, and they were all going to Lebanon for the most part. So Lebanon had an influx of something like 150,000 refugees from Syria at that time. And again, that really wasn't being discussed. And at this point, I think it's pretty clear that now more people have left than have gone back. and more people will keep leaving. I think you will see the Christian community leave Syria. An incredible fact. I've been to churches there that date back to 69 AD. St. Paul had his conversion on the road to Damascus.
Mm-hmm.
St. Peter and Paul founded the Christian church in Syria. And you won't have much of a Christian church left there. Just like you barely have a Christian church left in Palestine, even though Jesus was a Palestinian, right? I mean, they've been driven out by Israel.
And Christians are being attacked in India.
In Nigeria as well. A lot of attacks there. It's incredible. Again, where are the human rights advocates in the West saying anything about any of this? I've never been more disappointed in the press, in particular in the U.S. government, which I've been critical of really since I was an adult. But even I continue to be shocked by their level of evil, and it really is evil what we're witnessing.
I'm trying to get there's some confusion on my end. I'm trying to get a photo posted, and I thought that the photo had been sent. Well, I'll get that clear. Well, and so talk about this. Syrian government forces are killing civilians in Suwaida and declaring a ceasefire. Israel attacked Syrian troops as they approached the city.
Yeah, well, so this is the issue of the Druze. They live in that area, and they have been under very violent assault by government forces in recent days. Again, massacred, raped. And while Israel has bombed Damascus, I mean, I think in a way that maybe it never has. I mean, massively bombed it. And they do claim they're doing it to protect the Druze. I don't really believe that. I believe that what they want to do is take over that part of Syria, which is in the southern part of Syria, and they're using the Druze as a pretext for that. And by the way, there's been Druze leaders, community leaders coming out opposing Israel's attack on Syria. They're like, yeah, we're under attack and we're going to defend ourselves, but we don't want Israel coming in here. Number one, making things more difficult for us, but also number two, attacking our sovereign nation, And that's a little known secret but I read that, in fact, I think that part of it in the Times of Israel this morning, that the Druze leaders had taken that position against Israel's attack on Syria. So, Netanyahu can say anything he wants, but the Druze are not supporting what he's doing.
Well, in fact, that whole hypocrisy is really what I wanted you to speak to, because on the one hand, Israel claims to be defending these civilians, while it also, on the other hand, seems to be attacking their space.
Yeah, I mean, that's what they want. They want to attack that space. And they want to gain control over it. I mean, look, we know that Israel wants this greater Israel, which would include Syria. I don't know how big a portion of Syria, whether it's all of Syria, but a huge portion of it at least. So I think this is part of that, and they're using the Druze as a pretext for that, because there are Israeli Druze. In fact, the number of Israeli Druze have gone into Syria to fight alongside the Syrian Druze there. So it's a perfect pretext for Israel to point to, again, to really engage in a land grab. By now, Israel now controls about 40% of Syria's water supplies, for example. It supported the overthrow of Assad, then used the overthrow of Assad to take over land, to destroy all of Syria's air defenses, leaving Syria virtually, helpless in the face of Israel, and they're taking over. That's what's happening. That's exactly what's happening.
So this piece says today's report suggests around 200 people were killed overall in the fighting, which began Sunday. Both sides were accusing the other of engaging in kidnappings, and eventually the fighting escalated to the city as well as surrounding areas. But again, it seems as though this alleged fighting is taking place at a minimum with the with complicity of Israeli forces and the sanctioning or the quiet complicity of the United States.
Well, yeah, in that both are supporting this government in Damascus, which is the one, launching attacks against religious minorities like the Druze. And I think, they claim that these are clashes, but really it was the government forces going into, commit acts of violence against the Druze, and then the Druze started defending themselves. So it was very one-sided to begin with.
Again, I'm in trying to get this photo posted, and it's a photo that you sent me from when you were on the border of this little boy sitting on a stone wall. And to me, as they always say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And I think this photograph that you sent me over a year ago, I think, speaks volumes. So, but while we're trying to get that posted, so what is it that you really want folks listening to this conversation to have a much clearer understanding about relative to this conflict?
I mean, I think people need to understand that the U.S., that their government is destroying the Middle East. And it's destroying not just, Islamic parts of the Middle East, which would be bad enough. Okay. Since 9/11, the U.S., according to this Brown University report, they continue a running tally of these things. I think between 4 and 5 million people have been killed in the Muslim world since 9/11 by the United States. 4 to 5 million. But also Christians are being killed as well. And the U.S. is destroying these countries, these ancient countries, ancient societies, destroying ancient antiquities, all in the name of democracy and freedom. We need to look, the position U.S. citizens should have is that the U.S. should get out of the Middle East, should get out of all these conflicts in the world, and start paying attention to the problems we have at home. That's my message.
There we go. Professor Dan Kovalik, as always, thank you so much for your time. Folks, get a copy of Case for Palestine. It's incredibly why it matters and why you should care. It is an incredibly clear, very, very clear, very, very well-written expose on the realities of these circumstances and why it matters. Professor Dan Kovalik, as always, thank you for your time. Thank you for your work, your friendship, and really appreciate you joining the program today. Look forward to having you back.
My pleasure. Always. Thank you, Wilmer. Take care.
All right, folks. I want to thank you all. Thank Dan for joining me today. Thank you all for listening to and watching the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. New episode tomorrow. The UN rapporteur, former UN rapporteur, is going to join us. Albert Desaias is going to join us tomorrow. And so stay tuned for that. Follow and subscribe, leave a review, share the show, follow us on social media. All the links are below. Remember that this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge. That talk without analysis is just chatter, and we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. See y'all tomorrow again. Alfred Desaias will join us. Until then, I am Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a wonderful remainder of your day. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.